Hello and welcome to my podcast, Conversations with David. I am your host, David Owasi. And on this podcast, we're talking to accomplished professionals and entrepreneurs across the country. We're learning about what keeps them passionate, what keeps them going. And we're also talking about some of the lessons learned along the way. Now, I'm here with my friend, someone I have a huge respect for, Chris Friesen. Why don't you introduce yourself, Chris?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me, David. It's an honor. I'm enjoying the podcast. Keep it up. So I'm a co-founder of a medical device company out here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, over on the East Coast. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University, also out here in Halifax. And so, yep, that pretty much sums it up from a top line perspective.
Excellent. And Chris and I have been friends for a couple of years now. And one of the things that really bonded us or got us really in tune with each other was a love for entrepreneurship and sort of venture creation, creating value. And I'm just going to start from there, Chris. Now, I know from some of our conversation, you wouldn't classify yourself as your classic entrepreneur, always dreams to be an entrepreneur from high school kind of guy. You took a little bit of a different path. But before we talk about your path, can you just share to me like what entrepreneurship means to you and why you've been interested in entrepreneurship over the last couple of years?
Sure. So it feels sort of random, and it feels kind of like there was no rhyme or reason that got me here exactly. Um, but to me, I think the reason that it has been such a blessing to me to start the entrepreneurial journey, even as like an adult, like you said, and not a kid, is because ever since I was younger, I've always really had a strong search for meaning. And I've really brought that into the things I do in my professional life. I've always been really ambitious for meaning, trying to, find things to do with my time between, the time you wake up and the time you stop working that feel at the end of the day like, you know, um, you don't regret what you did. You don't have any second thoughts about whether that was a good use of your time. So I'm craving that, I guess, that complacency, that feeling of just that you're doing what you ought to be in the world.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing that was part of the reasons or part of the things that drove you to start your current company, which is Axem Neurotechnology. But before we dive into the full details of Axiom Neurotechnology, for someone like yourself who you would not necessarily say, again, like, entrepreneurship was like a passion all your life and, you just really kind of grew into it. So it was something more you realized when you were trying to find purpose, trying to find meaning, trying to find some significance in your life. What would you say has been your biggest takeaway in terms of learning in your first or second year of business ownership or entrepreneurship? What was the biggest things you took away from that first or second year? You've been at this for a couple of years now, I believe, and I'm just curious as to what your first or second year was like in business.
Yeah, we started our company, Axem Neurotechnology, around 4 years ago, and some big takeaways. Um, I think it's really it's simple stuff. It's stuff that's going to sound cliche, but it's just persevere. There's just benefit in just being able to take your lumps and keep going. And also, uh, I think it's a hugely underrated attribute to not be afraid of looking stupid. I think that was one thing I really learned coming from an academic background where it's kind of always a pissing contest, especially in the sciences. It's all about, critiquing and proving people wrong. And so you can kind of get your guard up and get defensive and get your ego kind of, invested in feeling smart. And, working on a venture like this has really uh, helped me understand in like an internalized way that those feelings are hugely inefficient. They're just noise amongst the signals that you're trying to send to people. And so if you can be realistic with yourself and not fear, acknowledging that you don't know things, or acknowledging that you might have thought you knew something a day ago, but then you screwed it up, and now you didn't know. you just become way more useful.
I definitely I agree with that, with those points. The first one being perseverance. I think first and foremost, no matter how talented you are or how great your business idea is, everyone is always going to hit that slump or that slope where things are not working out, or deals are not coming in, and you're like, should I do this? Is this going to still work? I think I definitely agree with the fact that perseverance is a quality that transcends whatever it is you're doing, whether it's an entrepreneurship or your career, whatever it is. I think that's a very core skill. I particularly like the second point you made, because that was something I struggled with initially as well. The desire to always be right, or always to appear that you know everything all the time. I think it's a core skill to learn. Being able to be vulnerable, if you will, and kind of put your ego in check. I think that's a very key point you made.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of my next question here for you, tell me more about Axem Neurotechnology. What is the core of your business? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so we're trying to improve post-stroke physical rehabilitation. Stroke is a huge problem. About 1 million strokes happen in the US every year, and that's kind of consistent worldwide. And about 80% of strokes leave people with some kind of physical disability afterwards. We're focused right now on the disability in people's upper extremities. So usually people have hemiplegia after a stroke. So one side of their body is paralyzed or weak or spastic. And so we are trying to improve rehabilitation after stroke, and that's a huge thing. And we're only, trying to start by tackling one little piece. But that's kind of the vision for the company. And so rehabilitation after stroke is evidence-based. It's the right thing to be doing, but many studies show that as few as 50% of patients actually benefit from it when they get it at all. There's also problems of access, because rehabilitation is generally done one-on-one with a person, and it's very expensive. But even when patients get rehabilitation, often they don't benefit. And one big reason why is we don't understand rehabilitation after a stroke the same way we understand rehabilitation after a knee injury, for example, because the knee and the brain, they're not the same in terms of complexity. And so you can't reverse engineer repair of the neural tissue of the brain tissue the same way you can of the tissue in your knee.
Mhm.
And so what we're doing is we're building devices that measure the brain, that can make an impact on the ability of the healthcare system to, optimize people's physical recovery after a stroke. So our first product that we're working on now, so we're not in the market yet, is we're a medical device. It's a long road to hoe. Is a headband that measures the part of your brain that controls movement. And so the purpose of that is to provide feedback when people are doing rehabilitation exercises after stroke, because there's been some studies that have shown that that can be beneficial. If people see feedback about that part of the brain, it can help them activate it more, and that can be make their rehab more effective. And then there's also some literature, some basic science to suggest that if you collect a lot of this data, you might be able to determine, how much rehab does someone need to hit this critical threshold to help them get over the hump and actually see gains post-stroke. So that's the high level of what we're up to.
Excellent. Thanks for breaking that down for us who are not in that world. But from hearing and listening to your response to what you guys do, it sounds it's very, very apparent that you're very passionate about your business. You're very passionate about this company. Is there a specific thing that drew you to this problem? Because is there some specific, was it a personal relationship with someone who had stroke? Or I'm just very curious. Is there anything specific that drew you to solving and working on this specific problem?
Good question. It was, again, like my story of how I got into entrepreneurship, it seemed almost kind of coincidental. So I ended up moving to Halifax to do graduate work about 6 years ago. And the reason I chose this particular program, this particular advisor, is that I really wanted to work on neurofeedback. So that's, providing feedback from the brain. So you're taking measurements from the brain, you're putting that into a digital interactive system, and you're using that, kind of like a video game-esque interaction to provide some kind of benefit, whether it's clinical or wellness. And so that was what I was passionate about. I had done undergraduate work in functional neuroimaging more generally, and I wanted to kind of hone in on this area that I saw as really promising and kind of, new and underserved, and an area that, could really use ambitious people getting into it with both feet. And so that's how I got into this general area. And then I met my co-founder, Tony Ingram, in the lab that I was working in. He had come from a physical therapy background and kind of had been working in physical therapy with stroke patients for a few years, and decided, I really want to go back to school. I want to, use what I've learned clinically to try to contribute to the basic science surrounding rehabilitation. And so he saw what I was working on. We became friends, and just kind of were casually hanging out. And he was I was kind of working on the basic science, I was like developing and testing systems to be used clinically. And then he kind of filled in the blanks for me about, like, here's the kind of impact this sort of technology could have. And that really drew me in and made me even more interested in working on these sorts of systems. And so that was kind of the germ. Since then, I've met a lot of stroke patients and a lot of clinicians who work with stroke patients. And that's kind of just been, it's been just fuel to keep me going. And so, yeah, that's kind of it.
Absolutely, and thanks for that response, Chris. I think that's really, really important. I like the fact that you were able to nail down the types of problem you want to work on very early on, and it made perfect sense when you were able to find the right partner to bring along on this project, and it just made perfect sense. But for the sake of our listeners, and some of them, are kind of wondering. And it's funny because I was having a coaching call today with someone from Ontario, and they were telling me, David, I'm not sure I want to go into this field, and I want to go into that field because my friends are in there, and they were quite unsure about what they want to do. What would your advice be to someone who is at the crossroads? Maybe they're just done with university. Maybe they're trying to think, oh, should I go into a master's program? Should I go into entrepreneurship? Should I start a business? What area should I start a business in? Based on your personal experience and how you came around to this neural pathway sort of problem you're trying to solve, what would your advice be for someone who's at that crossroad right now?
I think my first piece of, and first of all, I'll say that it's really hard to give good advice. That's another thing that I've learned from entrepreneurship, is that most advice is not good in every situation. So take all the caveats with this advice too.
Mhm.
But I think the first thing that comes to mind is I would say that it's not, to me, as important. I would de-emphasize what decision you make, and I would put more emphasis on what I would put more emphasis on what you do after you make that decision. So I think people put too much emphasis on, should I choose this path or this path? And obviously that's rational, but I think it's more important to just focus on making a decision and putting your head down and optimizing the path that you've chosen. And you can potentially look for future decision points where you can pivot. But that's what comes to mind. Is I think people have analysis paralysis by analysis too much. People hem and haw about if I make the right decision or the wrong decision, everything's going to be set in motion, and my fate will be sealed. But really, it's about making the decision effectively and just optimizing for the decision you make.
Absolutely, and I definitely agree with that point you made there, Chris, because at the end of the day, there's no way of knowing that a decision is perfect or not unless you're in there and you can then analyze and see what the results of that decision you made. And I think a lot of people are very afraid of being in a situation where things are not working out, and then they have to recalibrate because they almost like put their personal they attach their self-worth, if you will, to the results of everyday decisions they make, and that should not be the case. And that thing I will also add to that, Chris, is you feel free to agree or disagree with me. I feel like people should not necessarily have people should not expect to have the answers to what their future should be in like a few months. Like, you don't know what the future will hold, right? And if you think that maybe today you want to be a computer scientist, or you want to be a biochemist, or whatever it is, if you decide tomorrow that maybe this is not the right path for me, I feel like people should be able to know that that is okay. It's okay to not feel like you're in the right field. I want to make a change, because in my career I have had those situations where I thought that I wanted to be in microbiology for starters, And then I went to the microbiology class and I'm like, nope, this is definitely not for me. I didn't want to be, studying microorganisms I can't see. And then I made a change and I, went to a computer science, a different field, and that felt more natural to what I wanted. So I feel like people should not be wedded to like, okay, I have to make a decision about my future and it's set in stone and nothing can change. And of course, there are nuances to things where you have to still commit to things. You can't just like jump around from time to time. But I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on to another topic? Or?
Yeah, no, you put it really well. I think people think they're choosing a recipe, but really they're choosing ingredients. It's like it's so important to have people who can go across silos of industries, or of departments in academia. And so you should see it as, you're choosing an ingredient that you're going to add to the broth, not so much, a ready baked meal that's going to be, you know, uh, you know, kind of deterministically determined throughout. So I agree, and I think you made a great point. This is not to say that people should be flighty, because that's a big pitfall. You definitely don't want to be jumping around at every shiny object. That can really hurt you. It's good to be principled in your decisions, and it's good to be, like I said earlier, have perseverance, but at the same time, it's good to also keep a lateral view of, your career, and, think about the things you could do that aren't necessarily the next step on the path that you're on.
Absolutely, and thanks for that insight. I do like the way you use the cooking example. I know you're someone who really enjoy cooking and it's a passion of yours, but that was very well put. Well put.
It's 2020. It's the year for cooking in your kitchen.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, one of the things that you and I have spoken about before, I believe in some of our previous conversation, is the place of a university degree in today's day and age, and especially as we find ourselves in a pandemic. And you are, well learned person. You are currently pursuing your doctorate degree, so you definitely been there from your undergrad to master's level to a doctorate level, and that's something I've always struggled with. Part of me wants to like go get an MBA just because I think it's cool. But what would your advice be for someone who is wondering, what's really the place of university degree in my career success? As because I feel like sometimes our definition of success is based off of the model of learning of 20, 25 years ago, where you had to get a degree to get a decent paying job. But as we're in a full-fledged internet age, we're in an age where being an influencer is a very well-paying career, and you don't necessarily need a university degree to go that route. How should people start thinking about, what a university degree really means and what its place is in career success?
Yeah, I the first thing I think of is the signaling theory of education, which is a thing economists talk about when they talk about how to explain education, educational systems, and it kind of just holds that, a lot of the utility of education and degrees is for signaling. So you don't necessarily go to school to learn things and become a different person than you came out as. You go to school to, you know gain some sort of accreditation that signals to future employers that um, you can stick to something like a degree program for several years, and apply your acumen within a preset mold. Um, so I guess I'm a little bit jaded from the educational system. I should say that I don't regret my decisions, and I've done a lot of school after high school, so I'm a complete hypocrite. Um, but I think that one of your previous guests, I heard commented on this, how it's just clear that if if undergraduate in particular education is becoming more common, then you really need to think creatively about how you differentiate yourselves from your undergraduate peers. It's just simple numbers. More people get undergrads than they used to, which means that the differentiability of an undergraduate education is less than it used to be. So I think that's something that everyone should reckon with. And so I would say, lean into the signaling theory of education. And if you want to do a certain type of career, you could think about what degree could signal that you'd be good for that career, but you could also deconstruct it and think, what could I do that doesn't involve stepping into a school and paying money for school that could also signal that. So I would just encourage people to, think about education as signaling, even though that's not all it is. I do believe that educational institutions are important for learning, but I think that's a useful lens for people.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you as well. And thanks for referencing one of my conversations. I think that was with Zach Johnson, where he was talking about the idea that, at the end of the day, if everyone is going to get a degree, then you might as well be the a university degree is equal, almost equitable to a high school diploma because everyone has a high school diploma and that doesn't differentiate you anymore. But in that conversation, again, I'm not sure if you can remember some of the details. We talked about some of Cal Newport's work and the idea of sometimes passion is not enough. You have to find some rare and valuable skills to differentiate yourself, which is kind of the points you were making from your experience. You've been in academia for a while now, and also you've been in the world of entrepreneurship. What would be a skill, in your opinion, that someone can start thinking of focusing on to help differentiate themselves from a crowd? Let's kind of pinpoint it from more your profession, from your experience being in academia. So someone who say, they've been in university, they're kind of started working on their master's degree right now, and they're thinking I'm going into doctorate degree. Now, a lot of those skills are good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it differentiates them that much. Now, this question might be a little vague, and feel free to approach it however you see fit. But what would you say would be for someone like yourself who has similar experience like you in academia? What would be those rare and valuable skills that they can work on getting that will help differentiate themselves from everyone else who has a master's degree, so everyone else who has a bachelor's degree?
I would say that it's really helpful to differentiate yourself if you start something. Um, if you start start a volunteer organization, if you can build an app or a website that reflects some sort of topic or cause that you care about. Um, you know, Starting a company obviously is a bigger undertaking, but I think that I think doing things outside of the academic world while you're in academia is really valuable uh, for not only helping you get your feet outside of academia, and most people do end up leaving academia, so that's important. But it also differentiates you, especially if you're starting something. If you're lots of it's easy to find where they accept volunteers and check the box of like, yes, I volunteered there. But if you start something, that's a bit different. That takes a lot more forethought. It often takes a lot more, like I said, perseverance. And so I would say if there's something you could think of that you could start, maybe certainly with other people, certainly small is fine, but I think starting something, I think that to me intuitively, that seems like that would differentiate you.
I definitely agree with you. And when I think about my own experience, I felt that when I was in university, I was kind of taking the same courses as everyone. And the way I felt I could differentiate myself was to do something outside of university. And I started my business. Now, also before starting my business, though, I definitely was volunteering in different capacities in different, university organizations. And I think volunteering is one of the perfect ways to differentiate yourselves because number one, you're able to test out yourself in a different environment without having to put in that investment, long-term investment. So you can say, okay, I want to go, work at a soup kitchen. And you can do that for 2 months, you can do that for 2 years, but you're not bound by any sort of contract to be there for that long. If it adds value to you in a way, you can definitely stay there for a while. But if you feel like, what, I want to do something else, you can always leave. So I think volunteering is an excellent way, not only to add value to others, which is great, but also to help you discover yourself in a way and to help you build some sort of personality or some sort of skills outside of your primary school responsibility. So I think volunteering is a definitely excellent way to differentiate yourself by having some of those rare and valuable skills.
Totally. And the nice thing about volunteering is that, because you're not getting paid, the bar is reasonably low. So, you can overperform, reliably if you put in the work. And I think overperforming, like I said about, decisions, if you have two crappy decisions about where to go, um, you know, you're going to have to make that decision no matter what. But it's what you do after you make the decision that's going to matter. So if if you can overperform at every avenue, that will just increase your options down the road. And so I agree. I think like I said, I think volunteering is great, and especially if you can really commit to overperforming. And you don't have to, but like I think I've been in some volunteer organizations. I was on a board of a nonprofit before I started this company, and one of the members of it was a tool library, and it's still active. One of the members, he came in, and it was clear that he had carved out a bit of his schedule for volunteering, and he was a middle-aged guy, and he was really capable, and he just totally overperformed, and it was amazing, and it elevated everyone. And I think he got a lot out of it as well, just by the leadership kind of gravitas that he kind of naturally assumed just by taking it really seriously and just killing it. And I think a volunteer organization can be a great avenue for something like that.
Absolutely. And thanks for that insight, Chris. And last point on that before we move on to something else is I think that, volunteering is also an opportunity to meet a lot of very, unique people, whether that's, people in the community who could be helpful in your various ventures in the future, or it could be very, good friends that you could make who could join you in different ventures. But usually people who you would see in a volunteer situations, they're usually a different type of breed of people who are selfless, people who will looking to add value to others whenever they can. And I think those are the types of people that you want to be interacting with anyways. So Chris, before we move on, I want to ask a last question about Axem. So what's the goal for Axem? What's the goal we're looking to lead this company in the future?
Like I said, our goal is to improve post-stroke rehabilitation. We might end up interested in other neurological diseases, but right now we're really laser focused on stroke and on post-stroke rehabilitation. So um, I think that if we can bring medical devices to market that can help uh, clinicians better understand how their patients are recovering, and then reliably improve that recovery dollar for dollar. Um, you know, that's that's a huge lift right there. So yep,
Mm.
that's our big vision.
For sure. And I know you guys are working on a few tools and devices to kind of measure things. And I know you probably don't want to get into that because it's not set in stone, but I think the work is pretty cool that you guys are doing.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
For sure. So, Chris, I would like us to make a bit of a pivot in our conversation here. I want us to talk a little bit about some of the softer skills, and I know you wouldn't consider yourself an expert, if you will, on the areas of emotional intelligence and soft skills. But I'm just curious, at a general level, what would you say, emotional intelligence or soft skills? What would you say is the place of those skills in your own career success when you look back on your career? Sometimes you're not very like, oh, okay, I was able to practice empathy here. I was able to practice self-regulation here. But when you think about things at a grander, bigger scale, what would you say is the role of those softer skills in career growth and success?
So for myself, what comes to mind first is just being able to uh, lead a team of people, and have people work together, and get things done. That's a challenge, especially for someone like me who was right out of school, still in school at the time. And so I think that while I certainly was far from perfect and still am, I think that I've met a lot of startup founders, and I've seen a lot of struggles um, with collaborations and employees, and I think I had an okay personality to start something like this. I think you need it's a yeah I think soft skills are kind of like the interface of your personality with your situation, and then using awareness to kind of optimize your personality for that situation. And yeah, I would say overall it's helped me have my role on this team here at Axem, and also get collaborations going with people. And it's hard to put a dollar value or a time value on it, but it feels like it has been important, just kind of looking around at other companies that I've seen throughout the years.
Yeah, spoken like a true scientist. So I think when I think about soft skills, I see soft skills as sort of almost a lateral skill where, regardless of wherever you are in, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're working in the lab all day, or whether you're out, in the fields, a farmer, whatever it is, those skills typically would apply in any field. And then, what we call hard skills are like specific technical skills. So whether you're developer is just relevant in typically one field, whether you're pharmacist, it's just one field and whatnot. So I see soft skills and emotional intelligence to be something that resonates across the board. But to really drill into some of the details of soft skills, Chris, you mentioned something about self-awareness, right? And self-awareness is the ability to understand what's going on inside your head, in your mind, and why you're feeling what you're feeling. And this is typically, associated with emotions, right? And emotions doesn't have to be like, singing kumbaya, holding hands, singing kumbaya kind of thing. Emotions could be something as simple as understanding that you're frustrated. And I think a lot of people don't understand when they're frustrated, and then they lash out at others, or they yell at other people, or they transfer aggressions, but they don't recognize that actually I'm frustrated because someone cut me off in traffic today, and that is kind of snowballing my whole day. And I think awareness is a very particular skill because it really helps you to understand where you are, your mindset, where you are at certain points, and helps you modulate or adjust your behavior to make sure it's consistent with your long-term goals in that specific situation. In your opinion, what would you say is the role of having that awareness? And I know in how many conversations, even though maybe unconsciously, I've seen you have that level of awareness about your skill set, about where you are in certain areas. But what would be your general thoughts on the skill of awareness?
Yeah, I like your operationalization of it as just trying to make a call to your long-term goals in each moment and try to act as though you're optimizing for them. I think that's an elegant way to put it.
Thank you.
For myself, I think that this is one area where I've had uh, challenges that are like kind of blessings, the good kind of challenges to have. Like I think too much self-awareness. I For a long time I wrote a lot of fiction, and I was, my academic background kind of started in psychology before I moved into neuroscience. And so I've always been a very cerebral person. And so that has many benefits because, you're aware, you don't necessarily need to just raise awareness. So for me, it's been things like, in the past, I've been a bit prone to like social anxiety. And I think that can be really helpful because it is a voice in your head that helps you, not offend people and not do wrong by people. But when you have to fire someone, um, you know, it makes the situation extra hard to, act with composure. And so I've had to just kind of, you know, just work on, living with that awareness, get better at, down regulating it, as it were. Um, and like I said, also what I called back to before, not wanting to look stupid. That's another thing that's associated with social anxiety, and so that's another thing where I think everyone could use self-awareness on and be relentlessly hard on themselves for trying to avoid um, you know making yourself look smart.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good point you made there, Chris. And when I think of self-awareness and how to grow that skill, I am typically thinking about, self-dialogue is one of the big things that I've had going for me in the last couple of years. And basically, self-dialogue is all about, kind of talking to yourself. So if you're feeling a certain way, labeling that emotion. So, for example, some of the examples you mentioned was, not wanting to look stupid. And I've been there before where I am about to make a presentation, or I'm about to have this, huge conversation with someone that I feel I have huge respect for, and I don't want to look stupid to them. And then I'm having those voices in the back of my head telling me how, this is going to go wrong, this is going to be horrible. And I think awareness is all about self-dialogue and telling myself, okay, so why am I feeling this way? Okay, I'm feeling this way because I don't want to appear stupid. Okay, am I actually stupid? Sometimes maybe, but for the most part, no. Okay, how can I prepare to make sure I don't look stupid? And then basically having that self-dialogue to be like, it's okay to feel what you're feeling right now, but this is the way to move forward. So I think that's important. Now, Chris, another thing I wanted to ask you about, and you brought this up, was this was about self-regulation, right? So it's one thing to have all of these feelings, all of these fears, and all of these emotions in your, behind in the back of your mind or in your head or your mind. It's another thing else to be able to push them aside, not ignore them, but push them aside to be functional, right? Because you can't be paralyzed by your fears of looking stupid or by your fears of whatever it is you're feeling. How have you evolved, or what does your growth process look like as you've been overcoming that? You talked about social anxiety as you've been overcoming some of those issues. How have you evolved your growth to be able to regulate and keep some of those toxic emotions, if you will, under control?
Um, Man, that's an excellent and tough question. I think something that's been useful for me has been trying to continuously stay out of my comfort zone, and that can mean a lot of different things. But I think that the edge gets taken off the types of emotions and thoughts that prevent proper self-regulation by experiencing adversity, and that's not to say that you want to traumatize yourself, because that will set that'll be one step forward, two steps back. But I think that challenging yourself continuously and kind of taking one step forward, doing something that feels uncomfortable, staying with it, working through it, and moving on and doing, and then having it feel, becoming habituated to it, and then moving on and doing something that furthermore makes you uncomfortable. um, i don't I don't think it was ever an intentional choice to do that for myself, but I think that if I had to diagnose it retrospectively, I guess that's the only thing I can come up with. But yeah, it's a challenging thing. There's certainly no one size fits all solution for everyone. Everyone has different personal styles with
Mm.
respect to self-regulation. I've been called I've been compared to Spock multiple times by people I know. So I guess a unique style, and it's not something that I've struggled with that much um, in recent years. But yeah, it's challenging to improve it. So that's the best I got for you, I guess.
Yeah, I do appreciate that feedback, and I think that what you mentioned, which is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think it's a very very key point in personal growth and development, and um, even regardless of what you're feeling, right? So if you're feeling social anxiety, or if you're feeling fear of failure, or if you're feeling you, I think there's a term for it when you feel like you're. I'm trying to find the right word here. It's called so when you're feeling like you're an imposter syndrome. There you go. That's the right word. Sometimes
Yeah.
you feel like you're an imposter, and you're a fraud, if you will. I think some of those things is really putting yourself in a comfortable situations to overcome them. But like you rightly said, not traumatizing yourself, but trying to find that balance. Um,
Yep, totally. Yeah, it's again, calling back to my academic side, it's like the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy, just trying to employ them in a way that makes sense for you and what you want to get done. Yeah.
For sure. Now let's make a bit of a change here to some of the last bit of topic. We're almost at 45 minutes here, so that's been fun conversation so far. But we're in a pandemic, right? And what that means is, everything has changed in terms of how we work, how we relate to other people. I'm very curious for yourself. You've been going hard. I know you're working on you've just finished your thesis for your doctorate. You've been busy working at it and relentless, which is great. But how has the pandemic affected you personally, and how has it affected you professionally in terms of your work as well?
So with respect to our work, I think we got pretty lucky just with respect to where our company was when the pandemic hit. It presented challenges, certainly, but I think it could have been a lot worse. So I feel kind of just lucky and humble about that. Personally, I think that some of the things I benefited from when life changed, and I'm here in Halifax, and our province has been pretty blessed relative to other provinces in Canada. Um, but still, we had several months where it was like, now my office is my kitchen table, and oh, this is my wife's office as well. So it certainly did, introduce changes. And I think some useful things for me was having just pre-existing habits that I could stick to. Um, I had been going to the gym. I could no longer go to the gym, but I still had the habit of waking up at this time and exercising, and so I was able to keep that. And and the challenge for me was kind of being flexible. I think I'm a bit one downside of my personality, at least these days, is that I can become a bit rigid. I take the heuristic of good habits are equal production, and I just run with that. So that was where I had a bit of growing to do, and I think I did a good enough job to survive and get along with my wife by being flexible, because it's just a different environment when you're working in your home with your partner, as opposed to being in an office all day. Um, and then I think another thing that was helpful was again, I was really blessed to like have my income not be affected by the pandemic, and so it's I'm a big fan of just eking out every bit of gratitude you can at any point. And so there was a lot to be grateful for in my own personal situation, because I was safe and healthy, had my, income, my livelihood wasn't compromised. So just focusing on gratitude, I think was also really beneficial for me, at least.
Absolutely. I think gratitude is a good way of having a mental health in place in these difficult times, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed with all the negativity and the crazy stuff going on in the world, which, there is a lot of those if you're looking for that. But also equally, there are good things happening, and they're, having a state of health, having, food on the table, having some of the basics being taken care of is also something to be grateful for. I think that's important. Now, another question, Chris, I have for you is in terms of this pandemic. What would I like to ask this question to every of my guests, and it's about trends, right? So a lot of things are bound to change and happen as a result of this pandemic, for good or for worse, over the next couple of years. Our behaviors will change. I mean, one of the most obvious ones is that the convenience economy, where people are, wanting things, everything done, delivered for their front door. That is definitely changing the way we shop, the way we do everything now. In your opinion, what do you think will change over the next couple of years as a result of this pandemic and how it's affected us?
Well, one thing that's top of mind for us is, the further decentralization of healthcare. I think that, we've kind of had a, trial by fire, especially in the U.S. The FDA has moved really quickly to license, to promote, like reimbursement for services that previously couldn't be. And those are things that the naive observer would have, or the rational observer before COVID would have said this will take decades to
Mm,
happen, and it kind of happened overnight. So I think that certainly has changed the trajectory. It was already a trend, but it kind of was a step, it was a linear trend moving slowly, and that was, COVID was a big old step function. And so I think that's gonna reverberate through decades. That's on the positive side. On the negative side, I uh, I kind of worry about our the relationship between experts and I don't want to say non-experts, but like in particular because the importance of science this year has been elevated, because a specific biological pandemic has been a huge part of everyone's lives, whereas there's nothing that reunites has united the human race like this for my lifetime. And so all of um, the the political polarization that existed has had a lot of gas poured on it, and in my opinion, the relationship between scientists and experts and kind of the population that um, is not engaged in those fields, I think that relationship was already pretty poor, and I think it's gotten even worse. And I kind of think there's blame to be had on both sides, but I think that's my downer note. So some good and some bad, and that's, I guess, the case with most things.
Yeah, I definitely see what your point there. I think there's been that friction between the skeptics. I think the skeptics have become even more skeptical of the scientific community, and the scientific community maybe to some extent have this view of you know coming from a place of superiority in a way and be like, what are you talking about? And I'm not trying to really, understand their concerns of people who are not experts by any means, but I certainly think that will affect things moving forward.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of ambition in the scientific community with respect to communication and understanding with society at large. People are interested in science communication, but when they talk about that, they're kind of talking about going to groups that are happy to hear from them and ready to believe what they have to say and just taking their message on a roadshow. I don't think enough scientists, um, myself included, reckon with uh, the potential role that we could have in engaging with the larger population. I don't have an easy answer for that. Again, I'm as guilty as anyone. I'm not a particularly public scientist, so
Perhaps
it's just
this
it's a challenge.
Perhaps there's an exciting opportunity for some technology to come in to try and bridge that gap or a new business idea for someone out there. But I definitely agree with you. There is a gap between the science speak and the general public speak, and it's only been highlighted even more so this pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go here, Chris, any takeaways, any sort of insights or lessons or ideas you want to share with our listeners before we let you go?
I don't think I mentioned, the role of mentors. It's can't be said enough. At every stage, no matter how low or high you are on any career ladder, mentors are always, they're always a secret weapon, and that's where soft skills can play a role because you'll be more likely to attract good mentors and have good relationships with them if you have cultivated skills that make you enjoyable to interface with. So that's one thing I should have mentioned earlier as a takeaway. Yeah, other than that, like I said, advice is hard to give, and I've probably given too much of it on this podcast already. But I just want to say again, I appreciate you having me on. I love what you're doing, and yeah, very humble to be asked.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you, Chris. You shared so much insight and a lot of welcomed advice. So thanks for all of that. I'm sure we'll have you again in the future to talk more about Axem and your work there. But thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome, I like that. Take care, David.